Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 4 of In the Fire Garden. I'm ST Bryant. I'm joined today with Justin Bryant, who is the author of the novel Thunder from a Clear Blue Sky, from Malarkey Books, as well as the memoir Small Time from Benny and Kearney in the UK. His short fiction has appeared in Bandit Fiction, Monkey Bicycle, Volume 1 Brooklyn, Thin Air, among others. He is a 2008 graduate of the MFA program at NYU and lives in Raleigh with his wife, Sarah, and their dogs, Roxy and Bryce. Thank you, Justin, for hanging out here and for bringing your novel with us from Malarkey, which anyone is unfamiliar with, we'll talk about Malarkey probably a little bit afterwards, but they're a great, I don't want to say indie press because they just put out a tweet about how the indie label is being siphoned by a lot of big houses. So their joke was that they're a DIY press.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, thanks for having me, ST. I'm really excited.
Definitely. And he's going to read a little bit from his novel, Thunder from a Clear Blue Sky, which you can order from Malarkey Books. The link of that I will put, and along with Justin's contact information, I'll put in the description of the video when it's posted.
Excellent.
So whenever you're good to go, feel free.
Okay, we're going to start with the reading. Great.
Yeah,
I'm going to, for people who haven't seen it, here is the cover. Here's what it looks like. And I'm going to read from the beginning. So this opening chapter that I'm going to read, it's actually a bit of a prologue, was actually originally published in Vlak magazine, which is a avant-garde kind of literary magazine published out of Prague. In 2015 or 16. I have been working on this novel since 2005. It's been a very, very long time coming. So this opening chapter, like I said, was published in Vlak, and that's where I'll start. On the flight deck of a 1941 production DC-3, First Officer Oscar Labruna, studying the radar, sees that there is a line of storms across Panama and extending into the Mosquito Gulf. The storms have been routing commercial air traffic far out to sea, but Labruna knows he will not have the luxury of diverting. They don't carry enough fuel for such a detour. Labruna can't yet tell from his radar where the strongest storms are waiting, but he's not nervous. He enjoys the challenge presented by bad weather. I don't fly the plane, he likes to brag. I orchestrate it. The pattern of the storms begins to appear on his radar. The plane is over 70 years old, but has been retrofitted with the latest and best avionics and engines. Labruna is surprised and a little concerned by what he sees. He can switch views to examine the storm by rainfall amount and temperature, and can view lightning strikes superimposed over both. There's not much rain, and the frequency of lightning is only moderate, but the clouds appear light blue. They're cool. This is because they are towering high into the stratosphere, far above the plane's maximum altitude. Labruna looks forward out the cockpit windows. There's nothing to see but black sky and wispy vapor illuminated by their running lights. It's 9:14 p.m. He looks at Captain Ferreira, seated to his right. It's going to be bumpy, Labruna says. I can see that, Ferreira replies, leaning over to check the radar himself. It's not my favorite thing, junking around at night in weather when you can't see a damn thing, Ferreira says. Then he laughs and wipes a hand across his mouth. Labruna tunes to Panama City radio for local weather. It is clear, light wind at the airport, but that's still 200 miles away, and somewhere in between them are mountains of boiling cloud. His radar indicates that they are approaching the edge of the first storm, but ahead in the dark night, they still see nothing. Labruna cranes his head upward and sees a few stars. This reassures him for now. My aircraft, Ferreira says. He has been in control of the flight throughout, but this is his way of reminding Labruna not to input the flight controls. I suppose I better tell him, Ferreira says, almost to himself. He picks up the intercom, pauses for a moment, and asks their passenger to come into the cockpit. The man enters. He is tall and strongly built, with thick forearms and fingers and muscles on his back and neck that spread his shirt collar wide. Ferreira explains the problem with the storm. The tall man listens, but Labruna can tell he's not really hearing. He's got something else on his mind. Ferreira suggests the man strap himself into his jump seat. The tall man exits, and Labruna and Ferreira turn back to the problem of the storm. Labruna's radar is now a mosaic of green, yellow, and red pixels. They're close enough that he can begin to discern the structure of the storm system. It's both good and bad news. It is a highly powerful multi-cell cluster, but there appear to be gaps and valleys between the cells. Already, his mind makes sense of the colors and patterns. He can see a route through. Here we go, he says. He smiles quickly at Ferreira. Left, 220, that's good, hold that. Ahead of them, suddenly, faintly illuminated, is the storm. The cloud structures provide reference for their speed. They are hurtling toward the gray-black mountains, but the valley he'd seen on radar is there. Left, just a little, he says. Ferreira eases them between the cells. A little buffeting, Ferreira says, referring to feedback in his stick, but the air is still smooth. Okay, you can level, and then we'll have to turn hard right. You can see it there. Turn. Ferreira banks them to the right. The right wingtip is clear of the storm cell by less than 100 feet. Out his window on the left side, Labruna looks up for the stars, but sees only the neighboring cell looming above them. He scans the radar. The valley is closing fast. The cells are colliding around them. They are at 25,000 feet, their maximum altitude. Right, there's still a gap, but it's closing. You'll level here and then right at 226, and then it may close on us, but it's narrow there. We'll be through it in 15 seconds. Out the other side, Ferreira asks. Yeah, Labruna answers uncertainly, but looking at the radar, he already knows he's wrong. Out the windows, he sees the valley coming to a dead end and the wall of cloud, primed with moisture and driven higher by updrafts at the front of the squall line, now rising impossibly above them. There's nowhere to turn. Before Labruna can say anything, Ferreira sees it too and mutters, shit. Can we jump? Answers. Ferreira nudges the throttle and eases the nose slightly up. The plane responds initially, but Labruna knows this is dangerous. If the plane isn't able to climb any further, the nose-up attitude will cause them to lose airspeed and, quickly, altitude. 25.3, Labruna says, reading the altimeter. They've climbed 300 feet. We need more. Labruna no longer feels exhilarated by the challenge. Adrenaline has been replaced by dread. Solid cloud walls are all around them now. It's like slaloming through skyscrapers 100 feet above city streets. Lightning explodes right outside their windows. He has been listening to commercial flights chatter about the storm on the radio. He would like to join in, ask for route suggestions, or just for best wishes, but of course he can't. The tall man pays them to be invisible. Graveyards in the sky. That's what his first flight instructor used to call thunderstorms. The cloud wall rushes up to meet them. She's strong, he says to Ferreira, but really to reassure himself. She can take anything. They look at each other and force smiles. Cloud swallows them. For 2 or 3 seconds, the air remains smooth, and then there is a single bang, and they are jolted upward with a floating sensation, the kind you get when you hit a pothole too fast on a country road. Labruna can feel the plane settling back into its trajectory, and then the turbulence comes. It throws the plane as if it is in the jaws of a giant terrier, up and down, left and right. A downdraft hits the right wing and snaps them into a 40-degree bank. Ferreira struggles to level. There follows a series of smaller but incredibly violent bumps, blurring the instruments to the point where Labruna can't read the altimeter or airspeed indicator. The plane sounds like nickels shaken in a tin can, all groaning metal slaps and bangs, deeper thudding from the cargo hold. He thinks of the old joke about DC-3s, a collection of loose parts flying in tight formation. It doesn't seem funny now. Incandescent white light explodes in front of them, filling the windows and cockpit. Labruna is momentarily blinded. The sound is unexpectedly muted, a muffled metallic groan, and all the instrument panels and interior lights blink off. Cockpit is dead. Labruna's eyes adjust rapidly. Without any glare or interior illumination, the clouds outside swirl in a mix of charcoal, black, and white. Lightning strike, Ferreira says. Engines? He asks. Without instrumentation, Labruna cannot be sure, but his instincts and the way his body feels in the seat tell him that they are still being propelled forward. Engine 1, good, he says. Engine 2, good. Labruna begins the process of rebooting the interior power. When he flips the final switch, there is a reassuring click and a flicker of light. Before power returns completely, he looks out the window again, and something to his left catches his eye. They are still plowing through heavy cloud, but through it he sees the silhouette of a plane flying abreast but above him by several hundred feet, backlit by more flashes of lightning. Proximity warning, he says, almost in disbelief. What? Proximity warning, 10 o'clock, right above us. Ferreira begins turning them to the right just as cockpit power returns in a series of blinking lights. Labruna checks both his radar and airborne collision avoidance system screen, but the first is blank and the second is still booting up. He sees the plane again, receding as they turn away. It is a DC-3 of the same vintage as theirs. There, he says, pointing. Ferreira looks over and sees it. The plane disappears in the cloud. What the hell, Ferreira says, angry and mystified. Does he have another plane up here with us? Another series of violent jolts rocks the plane. Labruna scans his radar for any sign of relief, and then there might be a gap opening at your 2 o'clock. I see it, Ferreira says. Ferreira has continued the climb, helped by strong updrafts, and they are nearly out of the top of the storm. For a split second, they find clear air, and he banks toward a seam between cells, but it closes just as fast, and again they crash and bang against masters of moisture-heavy cloud. At one point, a downdraft drops them 300 feet in 3 seconds. Ferreira fights it and slowly begins to climb again. Labruna looks up. Solid cloud gives way in places to gauzy haze. Patches of black sky begin to show. Climb, climb, he urges quietly. He sees a single star shining through the haze. They burst through the final curtain of mist, and suddenly they are skimming along the top of the storm. His radar goes black. The sky ahead and above them is awash in stars. They are free. The plane flies smooth and true. Ferreira sighs and says simply, fuck. Labruna peers over his shoulder and can see part of the gray wall of the storm receding, still spitting lightning. The captain descends to 23,000 feet. He leans back in his seat and stretches his neck. Labruna, his fingers trembling, reduces the gain on the radar so he can see the storm again, already 5 miles behind them. Although it is long and winding like a serpent, there is a bulge in the center where multiple cells are colliding, and he can see that it is tracking to the west toward the Gulf of Chiriqui. It will either spend its venom there or continue to grow into something that makes the news. The tall man comes back into the cockpit. He still looks fierce, but Labruna thinks he looks a little shaken too. Are you okay, sir? Ferreira asks. The tall man doesn't answer. He is coiled and tense like the storm itself. Labruna can see his rib cage expand with each breath. The tall man looks past him, out the cockpit windows. A carpet of benign cloud glides below, faintly illuminated by the tapestry of stars above, and a sliver of moon newly risen. His breathing slows. It's beautiful, he says. The clouds unroll beneath them. The engines hum and the radio crackles with chatter, pilots and air traffic control trying to fight the storm, but to Labruna it feels very quiet in the cockpit. Yes, Ferreira agrees. Yes, it's beautiful. You must see beautiful things up here all the time, the tall man says. Ferreira looks at Labruna. Yes, sir, we do. The tall man crosses his arms in front of his chest as he stares out the cockpit windows. I envy you, he says. I took flying lessons when I was a teenager, single-engine plane, but other things got in the way. Labruna wonders if the man has any idea how dangerous the storm was. Maybe this is heaven, the tall man says. To fly forever on a beautiful light and never have to land? Who can say, sir, Ferreira answers. What a heaven that would be, the tall man says, to never land, to stay here with the moon. He shakes his head. Well, right, who can say? Who can really say? He nods again, then returns to the cabin. Captain Ferreira exhales deeply. Labruna looks out the window to his left, but sees only the receding storm.
That was a, a thrilling opening, especially for me, because planes freak me out. I'm a bad flyer, so that was as action packed of a scene as I could handle. When
Yeah, they freak me out too. It's a recurring motif in the novel, and a lot of what I write is written from a place of fear, I think.
Yeah, because when you said it dropped 300 feet in 3 seconds, it's like, oh. I freaked out there for a second. I was like, oh no, I can feel that. I can feel the drop.
Nobody likes that.
So I'll read a couple of the prose poems in mine, because I think that fits with your prose, and then I'm going to ask you. We'll have our Q&A, and I'll ask you about your novel because I want to hear you describe it for us.
Okay.
All right. So this is called In the Classroom of Infinite Sadness. All my life I've dreamt of gods. There's a constant Decameron in my soul of spiritual raconteurs passing stories around a fire of cosmic wars, and the self's dislocation from its greatness in that content in to be banished realm of 9 to 5, in that content to be banished realm of 9 to 5. I'm a teacher. During class, delivering the notes that I can recite somnambulantly. So unconscious are these unheroic days. Mythology is staged inside me that veils discretion from reality, and for an unaccountable duration, I'm lifted from a dull mortality into the throes of a Zoroastrian conflict. Night is run amok. This is not the Dionysian night of inspiration. No lays are being sung in the shadows to lovers. No ecstasies are staged in the woods. No powers imbuing the lives of artists with numinous blooms for them to plant the world with and thread the Apollonian weather with the incontestable value of chaos. No, this is not the night of our origination, when chaos, very motherly, sent us off to Eden to go play. Before God fouled it up, bullied us into life. No, not that night. This is the night when the beautiful gods fell, the gods that bedeck our hearts with aspirations, that light the mind, that are scored across the centuries in grand displays, frescoes, pages, songs. Something evil turned the lights off, and all of life began to grope about. All my life I felt I've been crawling around the bottom of a bottle on a shelf. Tithonus in a Beckett play, Pirandello, life withering away while I languished on the stage, the lights undimming, my role undiminishing, the whole audience of time focusing on me while I stammer, choke, oblivious to all my lines while I'm there, while I'm dressed in chivalric garb, Don Quixote, though fully cognizant that I'm ridiculous, divested of the charm of the mad adventurer and the mindset needed to adventure. No, the inscrutable awareness of practicality in all of its dimensions is the parching sun hounding me to the desert of my life. There are no mirages that can save me that I don't immediately identify as a mirage. Oh, if I could only fall for that hopeful trick and wander over to illusion just to see. No, the dream leaves. The students return staring at me. What did I say last? Which uh, was written actually, I think, at my classroom desk or something during a break in the day.
That was great.
Abandoned, darker than it's ever been. The dark. I saw it seen. I saw it seen in its jaws, jaws of eyes. My blood to fall to mud. I saw bones, the leaves, the aeolian blood, the past, voyaging with fortune overboard. The ship of a dark, a swirl around this high blood. The steps of time eaten toward the final eon. Death behind me. Dark, dark. Death. The lights are bleeding toward. All the dark up ahead. I go ahead. The wind you hear scream, screams of atoms in the evening's closing, a dark grip to doom. The night cracked sovereign, a whip in the deathland. Genesis, currency of nothing, blots extinction on the stars. Black holes freckle night, deathland's constables, Olympians, tavern keepers, vacant bars. I patron each, common friends, I'd set a starry table for. Dinner for these friends to come, my table in my darkness that I particle. At the door is a dark man, dark an instant, a spontaneous soul. A dark hand reaches for my hand. A shade in the night, a shadow toward my shadow's hand comes of a shadow of a shadow of a shadow toward my shade's original. Shadows blend. Dark. I the dark. Dark August. Doom will come in light when night unpalms the secrets of the night. The dark is a lonely habitat and tight. No mercy on the breeze. In the air, in my ears, in my head, in my heart. Merciless. The world is cold. It is the season. The mud destroys, the wind screams. Median of all hell, the world knows. This breeze blows. This breeze topples all things. I slouch in the mud. All the eyes in the dark. I see the eyes in the dark. Closed, open. All the eyes I see me. Observe the vacuum in the storm I am. In this deathland, in this deathland, in this deathland. So I wanted to read those two because you said before we start recording that you haven't actually read live from your book before, and I haven't read those two before out loud. So I thought that was a fun, both of us reading something new for the first time, trying to get acquainted with the text that we each wrote, which is funny because sometimes I feel like authors aren't the people that know their work the best, actually.
I think that's very true. The editing process of this novel with Alan at Malarkey was really, really efficient and good and fun. And I read through the book dozens of times, both from an editing standpoint and then a copywriting standpoint, to make sure that we didn't have any typos and problems with layout and things like that. I found that I've become a little bit divested from the book. It's now its own thing. It's out in the world. When it was a digital file on my laptop, then I had felt like I had, this proprietary relationship with it and ownership with it. Now it's out there and gone. And so it was interesting to pick it up just now and read that chapter. And I mentioned that I started this book in like 2005, and that chapter has remained almost in that exact form I just read it. Many other things about the book have changed wildly, but yeah, it's kind of fun to pick it up and read it. I'm not a big fan of my own work. Once it's been published, I'm always worried that I'll see things I don't like, and so I tend to not look at anything that I've had published again. I really like the cover. I love the way this book looks and feels.
Yeah, I love the
And
cover
so
of it.
it's been fun to, yeah, Angelo did a fantastic job. It's been fun to have it around the house and say, okay, it's really real as a physical thing, but that's the first time I've actually cracked the pages and read anything.
Yeah, when when my book came, I opened the box. I avoided opening the box for a little bit, but then I, took the book out and I almost liked it as like a decoration more than a
Yeah,
book. It's like, okay, there it is. I don't want to read it. I don't want to touch it or open it because,
yeah, yeah,
like you said, I'm terrified. I'm actually afraid of it. I've gotten now acquainted with it, but for a long time, I'm like you, where I don't read my own stuff with much joy or relish. I tend to, once it's out
yeah.
there, it's like, okay, now keep it away from me, or else it'll haunt me with something about it.
I think that's pretty common. I think as writers, we're a little bit fortunate because I always imagine visual artists, painters who can't really escape their own work. It's always there in their studios. And I don't actually have a copy of my first novel, which was published back in 2004. I think I have a galley of it, unbound galley that we used for copy editing and things. Um, but that was written so long ago by an entirely different me that I don't think there's any passage that I could read of it today that I would be satisfied with. So some things are best left in your past, I think.
So and your book was published January 17th. So tomorrow will be about a month old. So that's really awesome, exciting. I'm going to read the summary of it that's listed on the website when people go to look at it. So here's what your book's about, and then I'll ask you to describe it yourself, because I feel like we tend to describe our own stuff a little bit differently sometimes if when asked about it. The Big West, a largely unexplored region of Calum, Central America, where time and gravity obey different laws, where sloped lakes and mineral snow decorate the landscape, and where a grand resort hotel existing simultaneously in three different eras hides from the modern world. As satellites rain from the sky during a solar storm, Jeff has come here to fulfill a mission he once believed in, but increasingly suspects is pointless. Is it just a malarial fever dream, or are his dead parents really here? Who is the shark human hybrid always waiting ahead in the shadows? What business does a mercenary known only as the Tall Man have with him? And is there any way for him to find his way back home? So that's our plot. But now, if I were to ask you, like, what's your novel about? Like, how would you tell me what you're up to, kind of as a story and themes, and just what the overall aspiration was for you writing this?
Sure. I think what it's really about, and then that's a pretty good plot summary. I think what it's really about is when a person finds out what they have believed to be true about the world is not true, how do they reevaluate their priorities and find out what's important and what matters to them? And so this book is a story of this young guy, Jeff, who willingly enlists in a government campaign to marginalize what they consider a Marxist uprising, which is really just a grassroots political movement, with the promise of your student loans will be written off. And gradually, pretty much everyone in his squadron realizes that who they've been sent to fight isn't actually an enemy. It's not really a military conflict, and they also renege on the promise of eliminating student loans. And so most everyone else deserts. Jeff has left behind his girlfriend, and he, I guess, was a bit of an aimless young man who hadn't found his purpose in life, and so he thought maybe this would be it. And so he's compelled to finish this mission, despite the fact that there's a solar storm that wipes out all global communication satellites. And as they continue to move west, as the description alludes to, things get weird. It's not, certainly not a realist novel. It's I guess it's nice these days, you can just call it weird fiction. We have this category, so it's weird fiction. It's not magical realism, because it's not that magical. It's quite a bit more menacing. I think that's what the title refers to in a way. There's unseen threats and unexplained phenomena that are dangerous. But at its heart, it's a simple love story, really. It's Jeff trying to get back to his girlfriend. He's trying to prove himself worthy of going back to her. He could choose to go back like everyone else has done, but he feels compelled to see this mission through, and it takes him to a place, this resort hotel. It takes him to a place where very weird things are happening that sort of help him reconcile a lot of what has happened in his young life.
Yeah, that's awesome, because that that idea of that it's a love story, but part of that, the love requires you being able to love yourself. It is very resonant, because like you mentioned, Jeff could get back with it with all the others because they deserted, but there's a pride, there's an integrity with the way you get back. You have to get back the right way for Jeff. So you noted that you started writing this years and years ago. How much of Jeff is you, or you Jeff, or at one point were you Jeff, and now as the writing process kind of lengthened throughout, you kind of are no longer that character, but still had to write, but had to finish his journey, and maybe like tap back into some of those elements of yourself that maybe you grew out of, or maybe that were answered for you throughout the writing process?
Yeah, that's a great question. Very, very little. I consciously have avoided what we call autofiction, writing about my own life, as best I can. My first novel is set in South Africa with all South African characters, and this one is in a fictional Central American country. And Jeff might be a young, easily duped version of me. I mean, I failed out of my first college just because I was incredibly lazy and very unwilling to get out of bed to attend class. But really, there isn't a lot of that. I think as best I could, I invented Jeff. He's a composite of what I see as an older guy now, of a lot of guys, who are searching for meaning. I was lucky. I never really had that. I knew from a young age that what I wanted to do was be a soccer player. I went to college on a soccer scholarship. I failed out of college and lost that scholarship. And then I played professionally for 7 years. So the age of the characters in this novel, they're all like early to mid 20s. And in those years, I was a soccer guy. So I never really had that. And then I sort of transitioned into writer while I was still playing. I feel paternal towards Jeff to some degree. So he's not me, and he doesn't really have a lot of elements of me. He sort of becomes a leader as the novel progresses, and he's quite brave. And I would be flattering myself if I projected any of those qualities onto me. There's a lot of situations in the novel that Jeff persists with that I would have gotten the hell out of Dodge. As I said earlier, I sort of like writing about things that freak me out and scare me. So being on a plane in a thunderstorm, which has actually never happened to me. I've flown 1,000 times, but it's never happened. But I've always wondered what that would be like. And I'm definitely claustrophobic. So I'm already not great on planes. I'm not great on buses. I'm not great on trains. Trains are okay, actually, because you can get up and walk a long way. But
I like trains for that reason too.
yeah. Um, I'm rambling a bit, but it's such a good question. But it's a true and genuine answer that I don't really think there's a whole lot of me in this particular character. Now, the novel I'm working on now, I've completed multiple drafts of. I've decided to do that. I wrote a novel about college in the 80s and about a dipshit like myself who fails out. And I leaned into that one. I just went ahead and did it. It's written in first person, and that character is definitely me. Um, and some of the events, and mostly my life isn't interesting enough to make for good fiction. But I took those that setting and who I was back then and built a plot around it, but not for this book.
Yeah, that's cool because you gotta write a new book each time. You can't keep writing the same one. So you gotta.
No,
So I want to dive into your uh, short fiction career and everything, but the your biography that you tried to gloss over there that I thought was awesome is you're a pro soccer player. That's fantastic. I love soccer. I've been trying to watch more of it lately because I get obsessed with like Champions League and
sure.
the World Cup and all that. So I've been trying to become just someone who knows all of soccer. It's hard to keep
Yeah.
because there's so many leagues. A lot of my students love soccer though, so they help me out. But when you were playing professionally, were you also a writer, or was writing, or like when did you pick up writing then? Uh, and were you always a reader as well? Given that you have, not that athletes necessarily aren't readers, but a lot of times they don't always intersect the time to put aside for literary stuff as opposed to the
Right.
time you need for training.
Again, those are great questions. I want to clarify first that I was a professional soccer player, but wasn't a very successful one. I was a really good player. I got to that level where
Yeah, I mean, you got to be
it was
successful to get
there was
there.
an income, but I never really got a big contract and played in the very top leagues. I played in the lower divisions in England and then in the leagues we had here in the US prior to MLS, the main league we have today. So that's why my memoir about that period of my life is called Small Time, because it was a little bit, the lower levels of the pro game. Um, but my soccer career directly led to my interest in writing. I was also always a reader, although I was a weird sort of reader for a young guy in his 20s who really liked books. You would think I was at that point, uh, you know, Kerouac and Bukowski and the sort of macho type authors that young guys read. I was really into Thomas Hardy.
Oh,
So I had an absolute massive stack of all his novels, the well-known ones and some really not so well-known ones, and I used to carry them around with me everywhere I went, and so definitely a reader. Never occurred to me that I would try my hand at fiction, but what happened is one year when I was in England, I started keeping a journal of my games. I was a goalkeeper, and goalkeeping is by its nature kind of an introspective position because you have a lot of time to think during the actual game. Even a game where you're very busy, um, and you're getting beat and you've made 6 or 7 saves, that's over 90 minutes. And there's still these periods where you're sort of left on your own and you're thinking about what's going on. So I started keeping a journal because I was trying to improve my career. And so I would go home at night after games, had a lot of performance anxiety, and I had my identity wrapped up into how I played. And this is sort of what comes with the deal when you're a professional, um, is that it becomes your identity, and it's very all consuming. Like everything you eat and what you choose to do on days off. I would want to walk around London on a day off, but I thought, well, I've got to sort of monitor my rest and that kind of thing. So the journals were a way of me to keep track of how I thought I was doing. I'd go home after a game and I would literally write a page, very factual. Here's what happened in this game. I would write the date, the opponent we played, the weather condition, the condition of the pitch, the crowd size, and then in 5 or 6 or 8 paragraphs, excuse me, depending on how the game went, I just said, here's what, from my perspective, here's what happened in the game. And then I would sort of summarize it at the end, how I thought I played. And then I'd give myself an actual score out of 10. I still have all of these in a folder. They're handwritten. And I was very, very harsh on myself. I routinely would give myself a 6 out of 10, not much higher than that. I think the best I ever gave myself was an 8 out of 10. But what started to happen toward the end of that season is a couple of times I noticed during the game, I would think about how I was going to write what just happened. And that was the first time that the writing started to bleed into the soccer. And until that point, it'd always been just the soccer. And then the writing was something I did afterwards in order to help the soccer. But at some point after 25 games, I felt like my vocabulary has to get better. I'm saying that, only a certain limited number of kind of things happen every game. And I felt like I was being repetitive. And I just started thinking about ways I was going to describe what just happened when I sat down to write that night. And that was a turning point for me. That's when I thought I might like that more than the soccer. I might enjoy this kind of expression, which I can do without judgment, without an immediate sense of success or failure, which is what you get when you play a sport. Maybe it could be a long-term project, that sort of thing. So I finished that season, and I played a few more seasons. But from that point, I began to consciously think about writing, like how I could do it better. And I had a facility for it. I think most of us who end up writing and being serious about it are starting from a position of some advantage with regards to our ability to articulate thoughts and or to recognize emotions and feelings in the first place. So that was the point I then started to read more contemporary stuff, because I sort of realized, well, I can't write like Thomas Hardy. I don't think that's really hot right now, writing novels about how society doesn't want to let a stonemason's son go to college. Times have changed. So I then, I sort of embraced contemporary literature. This would have been in the 90s, early 90s, very early 90s, maybe even late 80s, but I think early 90s. And it wasn't long before I sort of realized that the little miniature essays about my, playing soccer were very limiting to me. And I wanted to try fiction. I wanted a chance to be creative in the sense of like just inventing a story. And one of the things that made me think that way is a friend of mine told me the worst story I'd ever heard. And he got me thinking about what story really is. The brief version is his girlfriend dropped him off at the gym, said, "I'll pick you up at 3." At 3, he walked outside into a pouring thunderstorm. And then he said, yeah, it was raining so hard that then, this car pulled up and it looked like her car. And I thought it was her. So I just like ran and opened the door and jumped in, and it was her. And it was just this setup with no payoff. And I just thought, yeah, that's the worst story I've ever heard. And so again, that got me thinking about, well, what is a good story? What's the difference between story and a thing that just happens in your life? And, it's things like motivation and consequences and, something that characters want and obstacles that are in the way and steps they take to get what they want and forces that are arrayed against them and all that kind of stuff. And I was lucky. My transition from out of professional soccer was what I wanted to do. I wanted to move on from it. I have lots of friends now from my playing days who had a hard time when their playing careers came to an end. I kind of couldn't wait. I was ready to move on, and I played my last game in the August of 1995, the USL Championship game. My team, the Cocoa Expos, against the Richmond Kickers. We lost that game, and I moved to the Florida Keys, which I had built up in my mind as this romantic place for a young writer to live. I was 28 at the time, so we're going to say that's young. And I wrote my first novel in about 6 months there. The Season of Ash, the one that was published in 2004.
That's awesome. And I love in your story, you can like pinpoint exactly where you're thinking kind of split to where you began to think about writing? Because my philosophy on is I think a lot of writers are always writing, even when they're not. Like the reading is writing, the thinking is writing, the writing is of course writing, but there's a lot more involved in the writing than the actual typing or putting the pen to the page. And I think a lot of my students who are super smart, I was never a top tier athlete, but a lot of them have plans to be or have ambitions to be. And while they're super smart and everything, their thinking though is like what you were talking about. Their thinking is sports, like how they're thinking about a play or how the practice they have coming up and all that. So I like that in your story, once you started realizing like, oh, I'm thinking about the craft of writing now as opposed to the craft of goalkeeping. That's kind of when the flip switched and the switch flipped in your mind that like, oh, I want to be doing this because
Yeah.
now you're more concerned with one craft as opposed to another one.
Yeah, for sure. And well, and as I write about this in the memoir, I think by that point also pursuing soccer professionally had become unhealthy for me. It was just too all consuming. It was the fear of making mistakes and the fear of not getting a contract renewed and the constant self-judging and feeling like I was being judged. I was lucky. I played before social media. I know a lot of current pros, and it's a different world they live in where their mistakes are on YouTube and they get excoriated on Twitter, and I didn't have to deal with any of that. But you still felt that it was out there.
Yeah, and I know the English soccer crowd can be can be very demanding on their players.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
But
So it was probably the healthiest thing I've ever done for myself was and I have a great relationship with the sport now. It's my day job. I coach at NC State. And I love it. Um, but moving on from playing and then physically moving down to the Florida Keys, which I put up there with Manhattan as a place. Key West certainly is as a place that everyone should try to live. One time. Um, it was very, very good for me, and it was great. Took a job at this resort hotel where I worked from 4 p.m. to 11 p.m. and I'm a night owl even now, so that was fantastic for me. Man, I could come home from work at 11:30 and stay up till 2 working on
yeah,
the novel, and then I could sleep in. It wasn't a big deal. I didn't have to go to work till 4. If I was feeling really good, I would get up and do more writing. If I wanted to enjoy the Keys, I would get in my kayak and kayak around a bit, and then go to work and then come home and write at night. It was a great setup.
so as a short story and novelist person, a couple of questions here. How do you know when like what you're working on is a short story as opposed to something that can build out to a novel? And did that happen in this particular novel where maybe it started as a short story, or there were a couple of short stories you had that you then turned into parts of this novel because you were after reading them you're like, oh, actually this this fits very well, like I can adapt this and just change it to my novel?
For me, it's a question of the degree of obsession I have with the story and the characters. So, and almost everything I think I want to write turns out to be a short story, which is ironic because I like to think of myself as someone who writes novels. I've only written 3, and only 2 have been published. But that's the thing I want to do. It's life consuming to be in the process of writing a novel in a much healthier way than the way soccer was life consuming. But it's a big thing where I'm, like you said, everything is writing. That is absolutely the case when I'm immersed in a novel draft. The last year of doing the revisions of this book um, have really, I've really, my headspace has been in that novel. I'm driving to work and I'm thinking about it, and I'm coming home and I'm thinking about it. I'm lying in bed thinking about it. um a short story won't inhabit me like that. A short story is more like, hey, this is kind of a neat idea, let's try this, and then I write it up, and then this is a neat idea extinguishes itself at what seems like a logical ending to it, and there's no desire for me to then, could this be turned into a novel? And I know lots of writers, it works that way for them, and I'm envious of that. But um, the fact that what I read from this book was published in Black magazine, it was always novel first. I just took that and made it a self-contained excerpt from the novel, and submitted it to the magazine and had it published. It wasn't like the novel grew from that. So I guess for me, I think of myself as a novelist. I think of myself as someone who writes novels. Short fiction is fun. I like creating a small little world, briefly, and manageable size, manageable number of pages, because I think a lot of novelists worry about page count and word count, because the business side of things creeps in, and you're told, 700,000 word novel is not going to sell, and a 42,000 word novel is too short. And so with short fiction, it's fun to just find a story you want to tell. You only need one scenario,
Yeah.
and then you develop that scenario, and then whatever your word count is, there's a journal that accepts that word count, and then you do some research and send them out. So it's um, a different thing. I'm not a great short story writer. I've only written a handful that I think stand up. I mean, we were talking earlier about our reading our own writing. So I admittedly am not the probably the most fair judge of my own work, but it's never occurred to me to try to publish a collection, because I do not have enough short fiction that I would want to be in the world. I have maybe 5 stories, and that's no collection.
For your fiction, do you have, I gotta word it right, not necessarily like hard and fast rules that you operate by, but are there concerns with what you require of yourself to go into a story? Like, you're more image driven, or you're more character driven, you're more plot driven? I feel like a lot of novelists or a lot of fiction writers are driven down one concern, maybe more so than some others, especially in contemporary fiction, where there's been a lot of trends kind of ebbing and flowing of plot doesn't matter, plot matters again,
Yeah.
all those kind of things. So do you find yourself where you have like some rules where like I absolutely pay attention to this and I don't so much care about that, or what do you kind of operate by?
That's a good question again. I think it's changed because I've been doing it for so long now. My first story was published in the Iconoclast in 1991. And so we're now at 2023. So someone else could do that math, but 32, 33 years, something like that. I think I used to be image driven, and the whole point of writing a short story was for something to be cool, like a cool, interesting scenario, a weird, neat, cool thing that in summary you could say, this is a story about, these shark hybrid people flying around an abandoned power station. Lately, as I've gotten older and I have dogs and I have a wife, I think it took the first 50 years of my life, but I think I finally understand that human connection and love is like this incredibly powerful thing. I guess I never was that interested in it or wanted to write about it because it was so common. So nobody needs me to talk about this, but now it's probably a thing that is what drives my work. And I had someone ask me about, and pardon me if I'm jumping ahead to something you might want to talk about, but I had a story in Bandit Fiction called Gargantua, which on the surface seems like a weird story. It's about a lonely man who befriends an enormous spider in his home. But it's about connection. He's a lonely guy, and he's revolted at first by the spider, but the spider doesn't seem to mind him, and he's able to look past the natural human instinct to be sort of freaked out by spiders, and it almost becomes not even a pet. They're almost colleagues. They're almost, on equal standing in this house. And so I guess that's what I'm trying to do now is I think that anyone that reads any of my work and any of the recent short fiction, I would hope what they see is honest attempts at connection, not always successful, but attempts at connecting to something or someone, outside yourself.
And what kind of or sorry, who were kind of the main authors, or did you have some principal authors that you kept coming back to in the, maybe we'll say kind of towards the end or in different stages of your novel writing, like in when you first started writing, like you were obsessed with these people and you turned to them all the time, and then maybe towards the end, like, oh, you were reading them like every day because they were just like putting you in the mindset, in the groove.
Yeah. I have to be careful with that because I have a very bad habit of imitating writers I admire. And uh, if I'm reading a good book, then in that moment, it's the best book ever.
Yeah.
And all I see is the shortcomings in my own book. And why don't I write more like this? And so probably not stylistically. I don't think I have any conscious imitations of any other writers, but yeah, I have a it's luckily something I'm able to edit out of, in subsequent drafts. But for sure, if I were to go through the many versions of this book, I would go, oh, there's 6 chapters here, and I can tell that's right after I finished Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga
Oh,
Tokarczuk,
yeah, yeah, definitely.
because that it was so good.
Yeah,
And I strive, to with very little hope to ever do it, but that you sort of endeavor to be that good. And it's tricky because the best writers don't leave you the blueprint for how they did what they did anyway.
yeah, they just make it look
So
easy.
yeah, and so it's if I were an architect and I was inspired by an architect's design, I could just physically look at it and figure the relationships of the angles, and then do something that looked different, but that obeyed some of those same aesthetic principles and things like that. I'm not really able to do that with writers that I really admire. I just am sort of awed by how good they are, and whatever I think it is that they're doing successful, I will then try to do. And again, none of it that never works. And usually I'm smart enough to edit it out in subsequent revisions because it's good as a thought exercise. But so anyway, you asked the question about which writers. Definitely Olga Tokarczuk. Peter Matheson is a kind of a hero of mine. This novel started out as a more realist nature novel. I spent a month in Belize and was just blown away by the tropicality of it, the incredible array of sensory overload. Really, it looks amazing, it smells amazing, it feels amazing. Um,
Yeah, I
and
love movies without a cruise.
oh yeah, it's fantastic. So I went there in 1999. I don't know how much it's changed, but back then it was dirt roads and no air conditioning and no resorts, no cruise ships. I did it on an extremely tight budget. The novel is set in a fictional country, but it's essentially Belize. So Peter Matheson, Robert Stone both wrote about places like that. I thought in a way that I wanted to sort of be able to do myself. Um, More modern when it comes to the more human elements about what characters want and their motivation. Um, Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer
Oh,
Egan had a big impact on me just
love that book.
because again, and she has experimental passages in that novel where there's, you know, a chapter that's done sort of in a sentence construction style, sentence diagramming, and other neat things. But again, for me, what was most interesting was how these people were dealing with aging and regret and loss. Jeff's a young guy, but he regrets doing this stupid thing, signing up for this pointless mission, and he regrets leaving his girlfriend that he panicked and ran away from. So a book like that was sort of infused with those themes was definitely impactful to me. Again, one of the problems I had is it took so long to come to a final version of this book that it went through many periods where the influences were at writer X, writer Y. Um, Luckily, I think the finished product is as close to what I've ever wanted to say as I've ever been able to get. I hope that holds up. I hope in 5 years it still feel the same way.
Yeah, I hope so too, because that I'll get you out of here on these last two questions, but that one leads right into this, which is we connected on Twitter over a kind of sentiment the opposite of that, where we both you put out a tweet about feeling like, oh man, does anyone ever just like hate their book? And I was like, oh yeah, sometimes I feel like, oh, I don't even want to look at it, I just own it, or all these things. Like, how are you feeling about that now? Do you still have those feelings of like anxiety or apprehensiveness about your own book, or now that it's out there in the world, gotten some reactions or things like that? Like, what are your feelings now about just the book?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I don't think it's anxiety or fear or anything like that. I think I think I have reached an age where I am aware that I am not Michelangelo, and that's okay. I think when I started writing fiction in particular, I was probably, if I'm honest, I was probably driven by a goal to tell stories that resonated with everybody and in a way that was original and just be a big deal. Um, Luckily, I don't really particularly want that anymore. All I want to do now is try to say what I was trying to say successfully, and then to what degree it finds an audience. I'm very aware that Malarkey is an amazing press doing amazing things, but it's a very small independent publisher. There's not there's going to be reviews in Publishers Weekly or Kirkus or places like that, or any media outlets. There's only going to be what we can sort of stir up on our own, and great things like what you're doing, to get a little bit more attention. So I've kind of come to grips with my own limitations as a writer. So I'm not worried that it's not going to be seen as genius, because I don't believe it is that. Um, I hope it is successful at what I wanted it to be, which is a relatively simple story of redeeming a mistake, um, told in kind of a fun way, because it is an extra literal world. It's weird fiction, and I had lots of fun inventing stuff that definitely doesn't exist in this world. Mineral snow and chromoflares, which is a fun word I came up with, of what happens when the sunlight hits this mineral snow, and the sloped lakes, which I always thought wouldn't be cool if water acted like that. If you like, there was a lake that was so it was just fun to do. I don't think it's going to change anyone's life, but I think it's a pretty good novel. So I feel pretty good about it. To sum up, and answer your question, I feel pretty good about it. I don't think that I have done the one thing I fear the most, which is aim really, really high on the ambition scale and then not get there.
Oh yeah.
To me, that's the worst failing I can come up with. The 80s novel I'm doing right now, the ambition on that one is fairly low. Let's write a fun, retro drenched, nostalgic 80s novel set in college, and that's not a super high bar from an artistic standpoint to cross. But I worried about this one a little bit, where a lot of it is about fears and fear of death and what happens when you die, and it's fairly big questions, and when you wade into that territory, there is the potential of looking a little bit foolish, because you don't have the answers yourself, and nobody does, but you also don't really have an interesting way to put the questions, and that was my concern. I feel okay about that. I had really good feedback from Alan. I think he would have let me know if I was going wrong. I had really, really good beta reader, my friend Sean Carswell, who's a great writer, pretty well known on the West Coast. He's got 6 or 7 books out, and he's got a sort of a cult following. He's what I guess we'd call a writer's writer. He did let me know a much earlier draft was going wrong, and then I made some changes based on his feedback that really helped. So I feel okay about it.
Yeah, that's good. And that's all that you can kind of want, is to be able to live with your work. So last one, I'll get you, and I'll get you out on here on this, but thanks for taking so much time with me.
Hey,
Uh,
it's been great. I'm not in any rush, but I know we got to wrap it up.
but I'm glad you brought up Malarkey, because I wanted to talk about them specifically. They're an independent press doing great things, like you mentioned, publishing some great poets, publishing a lot of great fiction. Like you said, probably not the most well known outside of maybe like the writing sphere, or especially the Twitter sphere, but they're very doing great stuff. And independent and small presses like that are becoming more known and getting out there in prestige among the writing world more and more. So I think that Malarkey is making great inroads with that. But about your book, what drew you towards Malarkey? What made you think that Malarkey was like a great place for your work? Uh, yeah, like how do you, and I think the fit is great with your work and Malarkey, but how do you feel like the fit is with Malarkey's vision and your vision?
Yeah, I think I saw the potential for alignment because I really liked the way Alan promoted the press and the writers that he, had already published at that point. For people who don't know the Malarkey story, Alan Good started it a few years ago, and he also has another imprint called Death of Print, um, where he put out his own books and also books by Craig Rogers. I have one, The Ghost of Mile 43. It's a great novel.
And I think that
Um,
that speaks a lot that Alan would put his own stuff out on his press, which seems like, which may sound like an obvious thing, but I think for a publisher to think to publish their own stuff on their press speaks a lot of like what they believe about that their quality. Like, you want your stuff
yeah,
well, so I trust
sure.
my own press, and so
Mhm.
it's a good like insurance policy to suitors to be like, hey,
Right. Yeah,
I
I think
trust my
so.
work here.
And I just like the way, I mean, the Twitter feed's just entertaining. Alan's a funny guy. Um, Never combative, but he will doesn't suffer fools in the literary world lightly. And I think every writer can tell you bad submission experiences they've had. I entered this novel in a contest. I won't say the name of the press because they're actually a pretty well respected press, and I know people have had books published by them. They chose as the winner one of their own editors. Um, Maybe that's the best book, but it sort of seemed like a way to just fund the publication of one of their editors' books. That's kind of how it came across to me. Um, and had, we've all had experiences like that, and Alan talked about that kind of stuff on his Twitter feed. I mean, he talked about, here's how some presses do business. This is what we do. We give you a writer contract that states very clearly what the terms are. The terms are very favorable to writers. Um, and so he did this really cool thing on their website where he said, if you have an unpublished novel, send us the first chapter. And if we like it, we'll put it on our website. And then you can use that um, in your submission process. You can say, I had the first chapter published on the Malarkey Books website. So I sent him the first chapter, what I read here earlier tonight, the scene of the airplane in the storm. He said, "Great, this is fun. I'll put it on the website." And I kind of thought that was that. But then a little while later, he emailed and he said, "Listen, next year, so this would have been 2021. He said, next year we're going to publish 12 novels. Um, we're going to do one a month. It's a big thing. It's the year of Malarkey, and we're going to like take the press. I'm taking the press, more mainstream, and we're just doing this thing. If you want to submit to that, if you want to submit the rest of the book, you're welcome to do that." Um, and I had already thought, once I got the first chapter on the website, I already thought it'd be cool to have the book come out with these people. Like this, I just like the vibe, the aesthetic, and the everything. So I did. I sent him, the novel, and um, it was several months, and he came back and he said, haven't made a final decision, but you are one of the finalists to be one of the 12 books. Um, and again, I'll know more. I'll make final decisions in another month or so. I think he had some help. I know Travis Cravey was associated with the press at that time. I don't know who else, but Eventually he wrote back and he said, listen, we'd like to have it if you'd like to do it. Um, and I didn't have to give it a second thought. He sent a book contract, I signed it, sent it back. So um, I and I think universally all the writers who've been published have really enjoyed the experience. We're a needy lot, as you probably would agree. We, you know, when our books are our babies, and um, I felt like I was being pretty needy about, you know, the layout and design of the book, and certainly the cover, because I did not like the cover of my first novel, and that made it hard for me to really get behind it when trying to like get it in bookstores and things. And I told Alan that early. I said, I'm going to try not to be difficult, but the cover is going to be a really big deal for me. And he said, let's just put Angelo on it. And Angelo is really good. And I mean, it's sitting over here. I keep looking at it. He did 5 or 6 covers, all of which would have worked great. But that one I really love. So that's my story with Malarkey. Now, the going forward, I'd love to continue to be associated with them. I'd love to do another book with them. But I also know the way Alan, you know, he's doing another year of Malarkey next year at a reduced schedule. 12 was too much. Mine got pushed into 2023 because 12 was too much for him, and I got married in November, and we had the wedding here at our house, which
Congrats.
thank you. Be very, very careful about deciding to get married at your own house. It means you will spend every waking moment for the previous the run up, the 2 months leading up to that, doing work at your house to make sure it's ready. So because of that, those two things, we pushed me into 2023. So I think he's going to do a reduced schedule and already has books in mind for coming years. So you know, it might be that this 80s college novel, I'll look for a home for it elsewhere. But I definitely, I'm sort of part of the thing. I joke that it's a cult, but a good kind, you know, a good kind of cult. We don't hurt anybody, but we definitely are sort of, the Malarkey writers are pretty tight, and everyone's been super supportive towards both me and each other. It's actually, in all honesty, it's been a reaffirming experience for me, because I wouldn't say I was jaded, but after 25, 28, 30 years of doing this, putting out a couple of books, the memoir, I'm, by the way, very good experience with that publisher in England, Benny and Kearney. That book's still in print. I still stand behind that book. I like it a lot. But definitely jaded with querying agents is just not for me. I don't see myself trying to get a book published with the big 5 publishers. Just not for me. I'm not a business person. Don't really know how to market myself that way. And there's some kitschy stuff that lots of my MFA classmates at NYU have put out really good books, really good novels with some of the big 5 publishers, and I'm happy for them. And a couple of them have had real, what you would call sort of literary golden ticket, real success, both critically and commercially. That is great. I'm not saying I wouldn't want that to happen to me, but I don't really want to go down the path that you're required to go down for that to happen. I would much rather just be able to email a person like Alan a file and say, what do you think of this? And if they say, this is good, I want to put it out, I know that they mean it, and I think it will be have some value.
Yeah, that's awesome. So uh, again, thank you, Justin, for, sorry, that's my dog. Thanks for stopping by and talking to us. So your book, for everyone who's watching, because this will be posted live, but I'll post the link to the Malarkey website actually in the description, where they'll be able to find Justin's book, and then definitely explore the Malarkey catalog. And Princess, stop barking. But if you want to, and you want to tell us how we can get in contact with you, if anyone, you know, wants to follow you or send out some fan mail and all that stuff.
Fan mail, wouldn't that be nice? Yeah, I'm on Twitter. My handle I have 2 Twitter. I have a soccer Twitter account, which was old school verified, pre Elon Musk verified, and I have like 4,000 followers on that one. But that's a sort of that only follow that if you're a soccer person. But my writing Twitter is at JTHouse37. So I'm on there pretty much every day. Great community of writers on there. We connected on there. The short story today with John, connected with him on there. So yeah, that's the way. JT at JT House 37. I have a website too. I don't know the address. It's but it's in my bio on Twitter.
Awesome.
I'm on
Well,
Instagram too, but Instagram is mostly just pictures of my dogs.
as what it's always become, as what it's
Yeah,
turned into.
yeah,
So awesome. Thanks. If you want to stick around after I stop the recording, uh, that'd be great.
definitely.
So awesome. So thanks everybody for joining me and Justin on this episode of In the Fire Garden. Justin was the first novelist to join me, so this was really cool. And definitely follow him and grab his book and support him and the Malarkey Press, because we got to keep these independent publishers going so they can keep publishing these great books that, like you said, are they don't go through the rigmarole to get to the big presses, but they're oftentimes no less quality than you'll find from the big presses for sure. And your book is, that chapter you read for us is phenomenal. So thanks again, and I'll
Thank you.
see you guys all for the next episode of The Fire Garden. Later.